Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Phia Group webinar. I am one of your co-hosts, Adam Russo, and it's just a great day, isn't it, Ron?
Not too shabby.
The weather's nice, 80 degrees, it's perfect, but we're back to reality tomorrow. I think it's back in the high 40s, low 50s, back to tomorrow. But just want to let everyone know we have an exciting topic. We're breaking all records in regards to the number of people that have dialed in, breaking records for the number of people that have registered. I guess for whatever reason, guys, this case for collusion, how the power players may have defrauded us all, is getting a lot of interest from all sides of the spectrum here. Ron?
There's a lot of conspiracy theorists, Adam, and they're looking for somebody that shares their mentality.
We're not here to place any blame on anybody. We're just going to leave that to Jen to do.
I blame Brady.
Ron, we like to blame Brady a lot. But as always, today's speakers, myself, Ron Peck, say hello, Ron.
Hello, Ron.
Brady Bizzarro, say hello, Brady.
Hello, Brady.
And the infamous, the powerful, the wonderful, reason that all these thousands of people listen to us every month, the wonderful Jen McCormick. Say hello, Jen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Like, why did she do that?
You know what? We may have people calling in from other time zones. I mean, they could be offended right now.
We're already getting questions, and people are already giving us their rude commentary, which is fine. We just won't repeat those. But just so everyone know, we are truly excited about today, and I want to make sure everyone knows you need to follow us on LinkedIn. So I think last month I informed people that if we didn't hit the 3,000 followers, that we would fire Matt Painton from his social media job, and we have. Matt's been fired. Matt no longer is just handling our social media. We actually gave him a promotion. He's being promoted as of next Monday, so we should all congratulate him. If you feel free to reach out to Matt and congratulate him yourself. Matt will be going on the road, so for those of you who just know Matt via email or from LinkedIn, you will see Matt at a conference at a Phia booth near you somewhere in this country. So trust me, Ron and I are psyched because that means less booth travel for us. Someone else could do this.
There you go.
It's perfect.
My days as a booth paper are over, Adam.
But seriously, if you're not following us yet on LinkedIn, we urge you to do so. The more LinkedIn followers we get, the better we can promote the benefits of self-funding and all the great and innovative tools and opportunities that the self-funded industry has. Speaking of which, I'm going to pat myself on the back. Ron, you want to pat me on the back?
Sure.
I can pat you on the back as well. Folks, we received the prestigious World Congress Health Value Award. There were over 350 nominees. We got the diamond, so that is the first place, we got first place for employer health plan under 250 lives. So I was going to pretend that I didn't care, but I started hooting and hollering in the hall when we were down at the World Congress a few weeks back in DC. So we're really excited about that. Obviously, it's nice to have other people think that we know what we're doing when it comes to innovation and having a great self-funded plan. And speaking of being a great self-funded plan, we also want to make sure we have great employees here at Phia. So as we announced recently, and folks, Ron and I have already received over 100 emails asking us if you all, the people that aren't fortunate enough to work here at Phia, the ones that just work at the regular companies, not us.
Average Joe.
The average Joes. We've been asked by all of you average Joes if you can be Phia certified, and the answer is no.
No certification for you.
No certification for you. Right? No soup for you. But basically, this is an internal training program. Level 1 certification will be completed by all Phia employees by the end of this year. The program already started. We're truly excited. And interestingly enough, if you want, during this podcast, I'm going to ask a couple questions that a typical Phia certification one person would need to answer correctly in order to pass, to see, if you out there in our listening audience think you have what it takes to pass level 1 certification. Level 2 certification will be announced later on this year. And level 3, basically that means it's just Jen, Ron, and I. Not even Brady's good enough to be level 3 certified. That's why he only gets the political slides.
I think it's 2.5.
So really quick, a special shout out. Every month we're going to do a special shout out. All you need to do is write a kiss butt email to myself or Ron, telling us how great we are, and we will give you a shout out. This month, Carolyn Grant, you are our #1 fan, self-proclaimed. Thank you so much for listening to us. I hope she's dialed in. Let's see if she is. Maybe she'll say something. Maybe she'll comment. But we really appreciate you listening every single month, and we even appreciate more the fact that you even listen to our podcast. So, there she is. You're welcome. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for listening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the one that doesn't follow along, the one that has to do her own thing. One of these things, like, it's not like the other. Remember that? What was that? What was that, on Sesame Street?
Sesame Street is the best.
So, Jen, take it over.
All right, let's dig right into specialty drugs. I'm very excited, and I'm hopeful that there's going to be a lot of questions and interaction here when we're talking about some of these FAQs.
Oh, remember, the more questions we get on a particular topic, we will do a podcast dedicated to that topic, just like we did last month on surrogacy. So keep those questions and comments coming.
All right, so I'm hopeful this is it. This is the topic for the podcast. Ready? Okay. What are the pre-certification requirements for specialty drugs? So that's a bit of a loaded question because it's obviously going to depend a bit on the actual plan design, the PBM formulary. But the one thing that you do need to keep in mind when you're talking about pre-cert requirements is that you're not applying any sort of pre-certification requirements based on a specific disability or disease. So it's always been our best practice when you're talking about a pre-cert requirement that it's going to be provided and actually applied as neutrally as possible so that you're not having any claims or issues of potential discrimination. But a pre-cert requirement for a specialty drug is not necessarily a problem. You just have to make sure that there's not going to be any holdups with your particular PBM agreements or any other agreements that you might have in place. Question number 2, are there any potential pitfalls involved in excluding certain specialty drugs? So that is a loaded question, and if we had an entire webinar to talk about just excluding specialty drugs, I'm sure that we could, but some of the high points here to keep in mind when we're talking about the exclusion of specialty drugs is making sure that this is going to be done also in a neutral fashion. Also, there's no rule, there's no prohibition, there's no case law that says that you are not allowed to categorically exclude all specialty drugs. But if you're doing so, consider whether or not your plan is subject to an employer mandate. Will doing so cause you to not meet the minimum value requirements? If you decide to exclude specialty drugs, will doing so create any sort of issues where maybe there's a HIPAA prohibition because you're discriminating against someone based on their health status? Is this potentially going to create a problem with the notice requirements because maybe you're reducing the benefits that you're offering and it's going to impact the FCC? Maybe you have to give a 60 days advance notice. Maybe you want to avoid all of those issues and maybe you're looking for the best way to put a program like this into place. Well, in order to do that, you can certainly reach back out to us and we can help you with your specific question or your program.
Hey, Jen, I have a quick question on this. So we're getting a lot of questions recently, particularly since I spent some time in the Cayman Islands the last couple of weeks. There's a Med City there. There are different options in regards to purchasing your drugs, getting your drugs in the Cayman Islands or some other country. So a couple questions. One is it legal? How do people put that in place if they want to do it for the self-funded plan? And last but not least, incentive-wise, if I want to incentivize people to do that, how is having an HSA, how does that complicate things in regards to the type of incentives you can do and what you can't do?
Right. So there's a couple of things.
Sorry for all those questions. No. I know you didn't expect it, but.
So when we're talking about drugs and particularly foreign drugs and international drugs, so there are special importation rules and what it is and is not allowed in the United States. So technically, the importation of drugs from another country into the United States is illegal. However, there are special requirements or there are special non-enforcement provisions that the government has decided to take when it comes to individuals. So if there's an individual that is not going to be using these drugs for a commercial purpose, that they're only taking less than a 3-month supply, and this is for some sort of chronic or life-threatening disease, then the agencies have decided to take a non-enforcement approach. That doesn't mean that it's not otherwise illegal. However, it's not illegal for a plan member to go to another country and receive treatment or drugs in another country. So there's always the possibility that while someone is away, they can receive this type of treatment, receive these drugs on a foreign basis, and it's not illegal, it's not a problem, but they're going to need to make sure that they adjust their plan language to accommodate the non-exclusion of drugs that might be from the result of foreign or from travel. And I also think that he had a second question about HSAs. And when it comes to HSAs, there are some particular problems that we need to be worried about when we're talking about incentivizing people. Because if you have an HSA, that means that the IRS rules are going to come into play. So when it comes to the IRS rules, that means that we cannot have a first dollar coverage unless it is for preventive care. So if we are waiving copays and incentivizing people to seek treatment here or get this particular drug and waiving the copay or the deductible to do that, that's potentially going to run afoul of the IRS rules and create tax consequences for those individuals. So that's certainly something that needs to be contemplated. Last but not least is our question about if patients use a copay coupon system. Say that 3 times fast.
Nice alliteration, Jen. I like that.
Does the coupon have to count towards the out-of-pocket maximum? The answer to that question, drum roll please.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
In my conservative opinion is yes. It has to count towards the out-of-pocket maximum. Why do you say? Well, in general, there is this little thing called the HHS rules about out-of-pocket maximum. And within those rules, there's a specific sentence that says that what must count towards the out-of-pocket maximum is anything paid by the employee or on behalf of the employee. So arguably, or not arguably, the copay coupon assistance is paid on behalf of the actual employee.
There you go.
So in not counting that towards the actual out-of-pocket maximum, that's potentially going to create concerns and issues. But the flip side of that is, what if there is an opportunity, maybe from a relationship that exists or a relationship with a pharmacy or otherwise, for you to actually know how much the employee is paying versus what their copay would have been?
Janet, based on the number of comments we're getting, it seems like people just don't know or don't understand this whole area. I mean, is that typical? I mean, you notice a lot of people just getting this wrong when it comes to their plan design? Yeah,
this is a newer issue, and there's a lot of involving recent trends where people are questioning it, concerned about it, because they want to make sure that they're in compliance. We already know from the 226J letters that the IRS is starting to send that people are paying attention. If there's a way to get penalized, that maybe you're going to be found out. Maybe people are going to start complaining to the DOL. So you should pay attention. And in this area, there's not necessarily any case law that says yay or nay on how to actually handle this. But if you take a strict reading of the regulations, then the reading of the regulation says that anything paid on behalf of the employee has to count towards the out-of-pocket.
I'm thinking that we need to do a podcast on this.
We've got an early front runner.
We already know, right? Because of Brady, we might just skip all your slides. I mean, I think you're just not needed to.
It's a big mistake.
I'm just saying. I mean, Jen's, this is pretty popular stuff. We're going to do a podcast on.
Don't count the votes just yet. I know Brady's mom has lots of questions about the political slides.
Yeah,
so
no.
you can
she dialed in.
So, short answer here is that if you can convince me otherwise that it doesn't have to count towards out-of-pocket maximum, I'm up for it. So I'd love to hear other arguments and discuss it, but it's my interpretation of the regulations that the failure to count that towards the out-of-pocket would create concerns.
All right, so what are we going to focus on today? I mean, we are about 15 minutes in. We're going to go over a bunch of stuff. Brady's political update, feel free to put us on mute for that. Setting the stage for RX spending. The CVS class action case, which Ron he's raising his hand.
He says, I've got lots to share.
Ron is on something, guys. I don't know what it is, but I think we need to give him some kind of pill.
I bought it at CVS.
I don't really like sitting next to him right now. I'm really nervous. The takeaways and then potential solutions. Basically, potential solution is call Phia. That's the solution. Next slide, really quick. What is the problem? This is what I'm urging everybody out there to do. Please close your eyes. Think about why your company exists. What's the purpose of your organization? How you can help, who you're trying to help, and that's going to help you become a profitable and better company for years to come. Speaking of which, we created this in order to aid and enhance our Future Leaders program. All those young millennials, all those young people like Brady, they're smart. They're not sure what they want to be. They want to be somewhere cool. They're not sure where. They're not sure how. They're not sure why. Well, what we've done is we created this to incentivize and to get these young people to realize that Phia is the right place for them. We're doing the same thing as an industry as a whole. We have now the Future Leaders Initiative at SIA. I urge all of you to go on SIA's website, sia.org, and identify those 1 or 2 or 3 people in your organization that you want to be a future leader at your organization, and send them to SIA for that discounted rate this September, I believe, Brady?
Yep.
In Austin. And again, I haven't kissed his butt enough today. Brady is on the committee for the future leaders as part of SIA. So I know he's one of the leaders now of the future leaders. So he's a leader of the future leaders.
Wow. That's leader squared.
Pretty amazing. So with that, he already moved. Do you know what he did? He switched the slide before I was done speaking. Like, you don't do that. I'm the boss, man. Like, you just advance my slide.
He's ready to go.
I think this guy's ready to leave the company. I know there's a bunch of people out there who would want to hire him, but just realize all he does all day, folks, is look for pictures of Trump. So.
Speaking of leaders, the leader of the free world had some interesting things to say last week. And I just want everyone to know these slides are actually probably the most relevant that we've had when it comes to a political update, because literally yesterday and Friday were big speeches made by both the president and the secretary of HHS regarding lowering drug prices. That's what this entire webinar is really about. There's a lot of talk about fraud and, can you use copay cards? The issue here is trying to get costs and prices under control. And so whether you're a PBM or a plan or a TPA trying to figure out ways to do that, that's why we're addressing all these issues. And so on Friday, President Trump gave a big speech, which was really a follow-up to one of his campaign pledges about how he plans to tackle drug prices. And I'll be honest, his speech at first, it kind of fell flat in the industry because he didn't really focus much of his ire on the drug manufacturers. And those are the ones that he really railed against when he was campaigning, saying they're getting away with murder, they're charging much money. He really focused on PBMs. And that's primarily what this entire webinar is about collusion, not the kind that may affect him, but the kind of collusion that's going to affect our industry, and that's between drug manufacturers and some PBMs. We're not saying that the majority or all PBMs are bad. What we're saying is some of them are working together with drug manufacturers and don't necessarily have the best interests of plans at heart. So what was in this speech? So some notable things that he mentioned: reforming the secretive rebate system so that consumers and patients benefit more. I'll talk about that more in a second. Banning what's called the pharmacist gag rule. This is an interesting rule that I didn't really know all that much about, but essentially many PBM contracts actually forbid pharmacists from telling patients when they go to pick up their drug if it would be cheaper for them to get that drug outside of their insurance plan. So literally there's a rule that says you can't talk about the price of the drug. So I wonder who put that in there. Obviously it was the lobby for the pharmaceutical industry, but that's something that he'd like to get rid of to increase price transparency. The other thing here is potential requirement, and this is also huge potentially, for requiring manufacturers to disclose the price of their drugs in those TV ads. So, you have those ads that are 30 seconds long that discuss all these horrible, scary side effects. Now they have to tell you the price, which could be the scariest thing of all, I think.
So can I ask you a question? So would it make sense for us, when you say pharmacist, so it's the pharmacist gag rule, but not a doctor gag rule?
Correct. Yeah,
so like your primary care physician, he's the one that writes the script though, right?
Right.
So there's no gag rule. Well, they know what's branded and what's not.
That's true. Yeah.
There's no gag rule against doctors.
Not that I know of, no.
Just the pharmacist. So when you show up at CVS, Ron's favorite place, Ron literally only goes to Rite Aid now. He's so disgusted, I think. He literally goes to Walgreens only, right? But the point is, so this would be you go into the pharmacist and them saying, hey, I know you're about to spend $1,000 on this drug. Or there's a cheaper alternative. They're not allowed to do that.
That's right.
You're allowed to ask.
You can ask.
But why would you ask? Right.
They wouldn't tell you. So one thing left out of his speech on Friday in the Rose Garden was he didn't talk about his campaign pledge to have Medicare directly negotiate with manufacturers. That'd be a big deal because Medicare is by far the largest purchaser of drugs in this country. But thankfully, alongside his speech, he released a blueprint, a plan. There's actually a PDF available. You can search for it on Google, called American Patients First. And in that PDF, they lay out sort of 4 big challenges that we're facing in the market. We know this: high list prices, high out-of-pocket costs for Americans, foreign governments free riding off our innovation. We always say we need high prices to encourage innovation. Well, other countries benefit from that, so the administration sort of pointing that out.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that basically, okay, so my cousin's in Poland,
right?
Because we're spending all the money
to research.
So all the R&D is we're paying for all the R&D costs here in America.
Sure. So looking for ways to charge Poland more, basically saying, hey, look, you benefit.
Hey, what?
We can carve them out, but
this is Portugal then, okay? Find another country.
Ouch. So another big bombshell, and I'll get to this in one other second, is this fiduciary status. And so on Monday, which was yesterday, the Secretary of HHS, Alex Azar, who himself is a former executive of Eli Lilly, gave sort of a more meaty speech where he went into more detail about what the plan is. And in his speech, he held up his pen and basically talked about his pen and how powerful it is. And I think that gives some clues, because as we know, this administration is not afraid about using their pen to get things done. And actually what he said was they're considering banning, I'll quote him, negotiated discounts with drug makers as a percentage of list prices. What does that mean? It means rebates. They're considering banning rebates that PBMs get, and some plans get, but mostly the PBMs. That would be huge. That would ban rebates. So as we know now, manufacturers will offer something like 30% off the list price if the PBM can get their drug on a planned formulary. That's a coveted spot to be in. And 30% off, that percentage or something going back to the PBM, in most cases, it's all of the money going back to the PBM. Of course, if you have a good PBM agreement, the PBM is giving you some of that rebate, but mostly they're keeping it. That would be a huge deal. It coincides with this idea of making PBMs fiduciaries. That would be a big step. There's already some case law where people are considering how they can hold PBMs accountable for plan assets. But now we're talking about potentially having agency action, which would make a PBM a fiduciary and make them responsible for looking out for the plan's best interests. And part of that would be eliminating things like rebates and using these copay cards, which a lot of evidence suggests actually makes prices go up, because the bigger the rebate, the bigger profit for the PBM potentially. So those are some big ideas. I was actually impressed, I got to say, with the speech, given that you have, this guy was someone who worked for Eli Lilly. He basically crushed all the arguments you typically hear from drug manufacturers about why, price had to be so high. He says, look, I've heard all the same script. I'm tired of it. We're taking action. So the takeaways are, this is a lot of the reforms being proposed are targeted at PBMs. I think there could be some extra action taken against the manufacturers, but for now, cleaning up the secretive deals and negotiations is very important, and we'll see what they do going forward.
So, Mr. Prognosticator, oh boy, what's going to happen? Because when you wrote here the takeaway that he railed against them,
yeah.
But right now, it's all a bunch of insiders who haven't done anything. Not much has changed. We heard a speech, recently.
Yeah.
Well,
so if I had to guess, I think the things that they can do.
We're asking you to guess. You have to guess.
Okay, I have to guess. So I'm guessing. Here's what he's going to take his pen. I think he's going to enact some regulations, if the FCC allows it, to require drug prices to be in TV ads. That'll be big. I think that they will, if not eliminate rebates, they're going to significantly curb them. So maybe they'll require PBMs to remit the entire rebate amount to plans, because they understand that rebates are driving up the cost of drugs. I think those two things they will definitely do. But addressing the list price, that's more difficult. I think those two things will be big for transparency. The other one I didn't talk about doesn't affect us. It involves Medicare. They want to change a lot of expensive drugs from Medicare Part B to Part D. That'll help the government. But for our industry, I think those two things, TV ads and rebates, will help transparency a lot.
Sure. So a couple of the people have actually asked questions, and they seem to be asking, okay, so they're looking from a political standpoint to take all these actions to hopefully curb the cost, but it's almost being couched in terms that this is to reduce the cost that the patient is bearing. It doesn't seem like they're really out there advocating for the insurance. We got to save insurance. Even the title there, right? It indicates and reduce out-of-pocket costs. So that seems to be the focus. And so a lot of people are asking, can the drug manufacturers sort of pull the pressure valve and get some relief and maybe avoid being the target of all this administration by using coupons and helping people avoid out-of-pocket? In fact, one person asked, ultimately drug coupons, are they good or bad? Just kind of that question, because again, we tend to look at this from the perspective of the plan or the insurance, but from the patient's perspective, well, shoot, if the drug company gives me a coupon or a rebate, then out-of-pocket issue is resolved.
Sure. So an interesting question, and I think though, if you read that PDF, American Patients First, and you look for the section about drug copay cards, which I did, of course, you'll see that the administration has sort of caught on. And that's why I said I was surprised, because yes, manufacturers like to show off their copay cards because it's going to reduce the copay for a patient potentially to zero. That's attractive to us, but they say in there that there's evidence to show that the use of copay cards actually drives up the list price of drugs and incentivizes manufacturers and PBMs to work together to hide the cost. So that seems to me to indicate that they've caught on to this trick. Look, we're basically, we're basically benefiting patients at the expense of plans. So that's why I think there's some encouraging actions potentially being taken there.
Is there a potential day where they just won't be a PBM, where you can literally just go on a website and just get the drug directly from the manufacturer and just bypass the PBM, the middleman? I mean, Trump's talking about
could be
how they're making too much money. Is that something that could possibly happen?
I think one of the harder things is it's a secretive world, and we'll get more into it when Ron talks, but I think this whole issue of them controlling the formulary, and plans don't know how to build a formulary. PBMs do, especially now more and more of them being acquired by actual pharmacies. They have the expertise, so we have to find a way to regulate the middlemen here, or transfer that knowledge to the plans somehow. That'll be difficult, but for now, at least we can take steps to regulate them. And last thing I want to do is just set the stage for what the problem is that sort of exploded in these fraud cases, which we'll get to. Just look at the spending, the projections on drugs here. It's just going up and up and up. Specialty drugs is like 1% of all prescriptions written, and they account for, a tremendous amount of the spending as well. It's up 33% since 2013. We have cases of, on top of all these problems, we have, Pharma Bro and other people out there who are just killing plans by jacking up the price of drugs and prescriptions which have been out there for years. The EpiPen was one. You can read about those. But basically, I mentioned that PBMs are really mysterious. We don't know exactly what they do. That is until some of them get caught.
Hey, quick question. I'm interested in this. So drug spend is up over a third by 33% in the last 5 years, but they only expect it to go up between 4 to 7% in the next 3 years. That's not that bad then. It's still growing, but it's not as bad of an increase, right? Am I wrong?
I think a lot of that is because when a particular drug comes out to address a high-cost condition, there's spikes, I think. And so maybe that 2013 year accounts for some kind of spike with a certain...
So there's no more innovation, Brady?
I think there's spikes in innovation. I think that's what it accounts for. But it's just very, very expensive. This chart here shows you the projected amount. It's hovering around 10 or 11% of total healthcare spending.
I see it going down a little.
It's gone down a little bit, but that's a percentage of overall spending on everything like hospital care. That's a huge percent on just drugs, and so we got to find a way to tamp that down.
So just go back to that slide.
Sure.
So it was funny. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, Benefest with Massahu, where we found out that the amount that's spent on your primary care physician, your main doctor. If somebody goes, "Who's your doctor?" Dr. Brown. 6% of total spend is paid to your primary care physician. And don't forget, it's called primary care because it's your primary care. Only 6%.
Well, it's the best 6%.
But drugs, we're spending almost 11% on drugs. Interesting.
Right. Yeah. All that amount, and we still have other problems to deal with. And for that, I will turn it over to Ron to talk about how much he can't stand CVS.
Finally, Ron gets to talk. So first off, anybody here loves CVS like I do? I love the candy aisle there. I'm already offended by what Ron's going to say.
No. I'm actually going to come in as CVS's defense counsel here and prove why all of these allegations against them are actually not worth the paper they're written on, or the pen they're written with. It's funny, Brady, you kept talking about how the political speeches, they're talking about the power of their pen. It felt almost like they're responding to Leonardo DiCaprio's act in Wolf of Wall Street, where they're like, "Hey, sell me this pen." They're like, "My pen can change the world." So what the heck is going on with CVS? So I'll tell you a really quick, funny anecdote. When we were preparing the slides for this webinar, Brady and I were actually working on analyzing a class action, which I'll talk about, that was filed against CVS, that being the sheet metal workers versus CVS case that was filed in March 2018, and it's actually a refile of some older cases that have been revised over the last 2 years. And what's funny is when we started talking to the attorneys on the team who were helping us put all the slides together, one of our attorneys went out there and he put together a bunch of different slides about what he thought was the case. We're looking at it and we realized that his slides have nothing to do with this case, and realized that he was actually putting slides together regarding a different class action.
Another class action
filed against CVS in August of 2017, that being the Schultz case. And my knee-jerk reaction was that we were going to have to throw those slides away and come up with the new slides, until I actually read about the case and realized, wow, we got to tell the people about this one too. So while we came into this thinking we were just going to tell you about the sheet metal case, we're actually going to be talking about both cases. Both cases relate to schemes, basically schemes that were devised hand in hand between CVS and the PBMs. And again, I want to make it clear that these are allegations, not necessarily that they are the fact of the matter. So in the Schultz case, what happened here was, the allegation is that CVS was raising the charges under the copay. And in essence, what happened was the PBM, which was setting the formulary, the data that CVS in turn used to charge the copay, was essentially conspiring with CVS to artificially inflate the copay. They would take this copay, and then they would actually share a portion of this inflated copay with the PBM, in essence incentivizing the PBM to artificially inflate this copay. And what's interesting is this lawsuit actually originated when a patient, Ms. Schultz, the named plaintiff, she had insurance. She goes to CVS. She ended up paying out of pocket for her copay something like $165. And then they discovered that the cash price, had she paid without insurance, would have been $92. And what I think is so funny, and Adam's cracking up, how many times have we talked about how sometimes the cash price is cheaper and they have these different pricing schemes for different types of insurance
The cash
plans?
price is cheaper than the copay, but the gag rule, they couldn't tell her
They
that.
couldn't tell her that.
But she could have asked.
But what's funny is that this person goes and finds an attorney. That attorney hears this and says, "That's crazy. This must only be CVS. It's unique to them, and it must be some sort of big conspiracy. If they only knew what everybody on this webinar knows, which is this is standard operating practice for everybody." So that was the origin of the lawsuit. So what
Who made up these pictures?
this is part of the lawsuit, Adam. This is why I couldn't take the Schultz case out of the webinar. I had to put it in there.
All right, everyone understand, Ron is spitting at me.
I'm so sorry. I'm cleaning up. I'm cleaning the speakerphone. So basically,
we need to wear those masks
and
today.
what's funny too is I don't actually think that this chart is accurate, because based on this chart, the pharmacy actually loses money, which is funny. But obviously, whoever it is that filed this complaint was just as excited about this lawsuit as I am. So basically,
Ron, just so you know, our favorite listener, Mr. Scott over there, he's already ripping your slides. He's telling us that you're lying. You're saying things that aren't true in the slides. Just so you know, we will actually do a shout out to you, Mr. Scott. We'll do a shout out to you next month as being our most loyal and most attentive webinar listener.
Yep.
So I'm not sure if you want to address that.
No, yeah, definitely. So Scott's actually indicating that in the case it actually says that CVS has agreed to defraud, which is funny because we'll actually talk about the sheet metal case too, where they're basically saying, hey, we're completely innocent. In this case, what's hysterical, again, it's that conspiracy between CVS and the PBM that's the key here. Because, again, the accusation is that they've specifically decided to defraud these people, and furthermore, that they're paying off the entity that enables it. But what's really funny is that this is actually, this scheme is set forth in this complaint, and in essence, it says that they're collecting this copay, it exceeds the cost and appropriate profit, and then they're using that excess to actually pay off the PBM, which in turn facilitates. And what's funny, CVS responded, and their response was, what are you talking about? It's the plan or the carrier and not CVS that sets the copay. So how could we even be doing this, right? Which, again, the response is, well, it's the PBM that facilitates it, and that's why you need to pay them off, because ultimately they're the representative of the plan or the carrier. They're facilitating this fraudulent behavior. And what's funny then is the response is, okay, CVS, even if you're right, and even if you're not conspiring with the PBM, you have to know that this is wrong, right? And therefore, you should at least be saying, and this is sort of the backup complaint, and it's the first one about the intentional defrauding of the patient on the copay ends up failing. The secondary argument is, okay, even if you're sort of this innocent bystander, don't you have a responsibility to say, hey, you know, your copay is more than the total cost of the drug. Why don't you just pay out of pocket? But that brings up, and this is why Brady said for the first time ever in his entire life, his political slides were actually relevant to the topic. That gag rule, remember the pharmacy gag rule. So even though the pharmacy is saying, hey, we would, but we can't, oh, poor us. So this is, again, one of the people who asked us the question said, could pharmacies bypass the PBM layer and in essence just work directly with the consumer? And Adam, that goes to your question as well about that direct purchasing. And this is actually something that came up a lot with the whole Amazon disruption.
Right, you can buy the drug right on Amazon.com.
Exactly. Well, this is one example, or at least it's an alleged example. And again, I'm not saying that CVS actually did the thing that they're accused of.
Mr. Scott disclaimer.
Yes, the disclaimer. But basically, you know, one would say, well, if this is true and they actually are doing this intentionally, why would they? You know, working with the PBM is allowing them to basically profit. If there was suddenly this transparent relationship between them and the consumer, therein they would lose out on that opportunity. So I guess it all depends on what you think they're up to.
We need to let everyone know this case is still pending. As we get updates on these cases, we will obviously let you know. But based on the amount of emails and notes and just messages we're getting on this case, it's clear we need to do a podcast specifically on it.
Definitely. The second case, which is the case about which actually puts CVS on our radar, is the sheet metal case. And in this case, two unions, they filed for class action status. And basically what's happened here is, and I love this case. If you think I'm excited about the last one, wait till you hear about this one. The National Council for Prescription Drug Programs requires pharmacies to report what they charge, okay, what they charge for different types of drugs. And this includes generic drugs, okay? And this is then used to calculate what the UNC rate is for those types of drugs in those scenarios, all right? Every pharmacy reports that generics, they charge a reduced price for uninsured individuals. CVS is the only one that reports that they charge the same rate for generics regardless of the insurance situation. So, what's the net impact? This actually results in the UNC rate for the generics to be higher for CVS than other pharmacies, right? So now, if you're insurance, right, you're the plan, you're a self-funded plan, you're a carrier, whomever, when you're paying the UNC rate or you're basing your price on UNC rate or it comes into the calculation with a network or anything, ultimately the price you're paying for generics to CVS is substantially higher than any other pharmacy because their baseline doesn't calculate this reduced price for uninsured individuals.
Cash price.
The cash price like other pharmacies. Well, here's the kicker. CVS is not actually taking that higher amount from uninsured individuals. What they're doing is they've created a subscription, a very low price subscription plan for people who don't have insurance.
A discount.
And you get a discount. So what they're saying is that the price is not reduced, just you get a discount off of that price.
So that's the argument for doing this.
Correct.
That sounds like, just real quick, in Massachusetts, how if you're a gas station, you are not allowed to charge a different price for someone who pays with cash versus credit card. But all the time we see, how come it's cheaper for paying cash? Same thing. They say, well, we're not changing the price. We're offering a discount off the price. Great.
So my knee-jerk reaction when I started talking to Brady about this case, first of all, there's the argument what's legal and what's right, okay? So people are saying, well, this is not right. Okay, maybe it's not. But what you learn if you go to law school, and this is why we're all so jaded here, is what's right and what's legal are not always the same thing. And in this instance, even if you think what they're doing is wrong, instead of just, slick and intelligent, but whatever, is it's illegal. And what's fascinating is my knee-jerk reaction when I was talking to Brady is, isn't this what every hospital does? Right? Where they have a charge master and that price is quote unquote the price they charge for XYZ service. Do they ever actually get that price from anyone? Maybe not, right? But what their argument is when you come back and you say, I need to know what your UNC rate is. I have a right to know what insurance pays you. I have a right to know what Medicare pays you. The response from the hospital is always the same. You don't have a right to know that. You only have a right to know what our price is in the charge master. If I want on my own to give a discount to a network or to Medicare, that's my own decision. That doesn't affect the actual price. And that's why the courts continue to support the hospital's right to use that charge master rate as the quote unquote price. And they don't consider the UNC to include the discounts, right? They say that those discounts are proprietary, and up until now, the courts have been unwilling to peel that back. And in that Virginia case, where one court was actually willing to consider the discounts, he ends up being appealed and overturned. So that is an example in the hospital scenario where every hospital is doing what CVS was doing here, where they don't count the discount towards the price when determining what their UNC price is.
And that just brings you to your comparison to the Sutter class action.
Correct. Because in the Sutter case, what we saw was not only that the hospital was up to this, but who was allowing it, who shielded them, who prevented the payer from auditing the claims to see that this was happening? The network. So herein the comparison is, if the network was deemed to be aiding and abetting the hospital in shielding their pricing practices so that the payer couldn't audit the claims and see this issue, is the PBM doing the same thing here? Because as a fiduciary, as a plan sponsor, now that I know this is happening, I should have a right to look at all the pharmacy charges and say, hey,
Not a right. You have a duty.
a duty. Hey, why is CVS charging 400% more for generics? Hey, something's wrong here. Well, you don't know that because it's being shielded, in this case, by the PBM, not the PPO. So therein is another interesting comparison.
See, that's the argument from a fiduciary standpoint. If you have no way of knowing, can you really be breaching your duty? So I could see that in a lot of situations, if you're a self-funded plan, the less you know, the more protected you are, right? You're like that wife who doesn't know about the 5 mistresses down in Florida.
Right, but see no evil.
Right? Like, you don't know. I have no idea what he's doing.
So Adam,
so
you're saying by bringing this case to everyone's attention, we've now imposed new liability on them.
So Ron, you just ruined everyone's day. You ruined it for everybody, Ron. That's why everyone's hanging up the phone. Everyone, don't hang up. We're just kidding.
Someone actually just left. Once the case was filed, everybody, this became public information. So just covering your eyes and pretending to be ignorant is not good enough. If we know about it, you should know about it. So ultimately, the question then becomes, what are your obligations? Well, first, if this case ends up succeeding, and I'm not necessarily confident that it will for all the reasons I just gave you, I think there's tons of precedent involving PPOs in hospitals where they get away with this all the time. So, but if somehow it did work out, it's a class action, which means if you're a benefit plan or you're an insurance carrier, there may be an opportunity to actually look at overpayment recovery, subrogation, and hop on board this class action, because if you've paid for these claims, you've paid for these drugs, you're technically, you've been injured by the action.
So what is the process on that? Brady, I'm looking at you because you look like you're dying to talk. So obviously the sheet metal case, it's a RICO case.
Yeah.
Could people be added onto it?
Yeah, so the first step is, these cases so far have overcome what's called a motion to dismiss. That's kind of a big deal because it means that the court, at least for now, thinks that the allegations are serious enough to give to a fact finder, probably the judge in this case. The class has to be certified. Anyone who's eligible to join the class can be added. That's still months away, though. So if you're a potential, injured party, you could get, you get those letters in your email about, hey, you had a Sony, TV, and here's your $12. Something like that will happen down the line if you're determined to be part of the certified class.
Basically, any self-funded plan anywhere in the country that's paid claims, pharmacy claims, to a CVS pharmacy.
Yeah, and CVS's PBM Caremark controls like a third of the whole. Them and Optum Rx and Express Scripts are 80% of the whole market. So CVS is a huge part of that. The odds are that you've been.
And FYI, we've had a couple comments asking if we know about the different cases that are out there right now versus other pharmaceuticals and other PBMs. We are. I mean, we only can talk about. There's only so many we can talk about in an hour.
The plan was to talk about one, and we ended up.
But the point is, there's more and more of these happening. They're out there, and they're all taking this class action status. So expect more of this in the future.
And it just takes one to stick, too. That's the other thing,
Now, I guess, guys, what I'm asking now is we have the takeaway. We know what's going on. What are the actual solutions? What can we do as an organization? What can we do as a self-funded plan? What can we do as an advisor to advise our clients in these particular scenarios?
Sure. So I think step one, again, is you communicate. If you're a plan sponsor or broker, you communicate with your third-party administrator. You drill down, you figure out who is it that is supposed to be monitoring this purchasing and exchange of pharmaceuticals. If it's the PBM, it's the PBM. If it's a network, it's a network. If it's a third party, third party. But regardless of who it is, you have to bring up the fact that, hey, I'm aware of these cases, I'm aware of these practices, what are you doing to protect me? And if it's nothing, what do I need to do myself to protect it? And we have, friends in the industry who often will tell us, a lot of people, they think it's the PBM's responsibility to contain costs, and it really isn't. They leverage their relationships and their purchasing power to make it more convenient, the process smoother, and in that way contain costs, but they're not necessarily an advocate of the plan. And so that's why we're starting to look now at other things that we could be doing as a plan in order to reduce the cost of the drugs from the plan perspective, the plan document, the processes, the procedures, et cetera. And Jen, I know we've gotten a few questions lately about carve-outs and things like that.
Jen, I want to ask you a question in regards to this. How popular is it? How many more projects or requests are you getting and your PGC team getting in relation to creating a carve-out for specialty or generic only, questions about that, anything high cost? Yep. What are the types of things that people are asking for, and the volume of those questions increased? Are you seeing a lot more people look at alternatives to the typical CVS Optum options that are out there?
Right. So it used to be, even just as a couple of years ago, when people were talking about what their high cost exposure was, they were talking about cancer and dialysis. And now the number one thing that people come to us about when they have a high cost issue when they're looking to minimize their exposure is specialty drugs. That's number one. And that's something that we didn't see just as recently as a couple of years ago. There are lots of different solutions and opportunities. Sometimes it involves working with other entities. Sometimes it is as easy as incentivizing your own employees to take in a generic when it's available with a reduced copay or no copay. So there's lots of easy ways to kind of address this. At least just to kind of get started. I think there's multiple levels of how advanced you want to get when it comes to managing this cost. But the more advanced solutions are going to take a lot of planning, as we're talking about many of the different potential issues that could arise with it in the future. But either way, there are actions that you can take. There are solutions that you can take to minimize your exposure to some of these drugs.
How about these vendor programs, Ron?
Sure. So there's a lot of different approaches you can take. Some, and we've already talked about leveraging the coupon and the patient reimbursement and the copay assistance, leveraging those. Obviously, there's some differing opinions on what you can and can't do. Tune into the podcast. We'll dig a little bit deeper there. There are other things you can do. For instance, you do look at the data and determine, are there some pharmacies that just charge less than others that aren't maybe, I'll say they're not as capable of crunching the numbers as CVS. Again, I'm not going to say they defrauded anyone yet, but apparently they're pretty slick when it comes to creating numbers out of nothing. So, who maybe is a little bit less willing to crunch the numbers and take advantage of the payers, so you could potentially steer people that way, the same way you steer people to providers in other medical care.
So a good example is like on our benefit plan, right, and our schedule of benefits, we talk about if there's a generic available, no copay. We literally make it zero.
Right.
What percentage of, again, I'm not just asking, I know I haven't asked this yet, what percentage of all of our clients' plans, folks, we literally write tens of thousands of plan docs a year. What percentage of them do you think have a zero copay for generics?
Less than 10%.
So what is the typical differential between a generic copay and a brand copay?
Usually 15, 25, 15, 30.
So 15, 30.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that big a difference.
No.
Can you tell the people what ours is? So what's our generic copay?
Zero.
And if there's a generic available and you choose a brand, unless the doctor gives you a reason on an appeal.
PAW, right? It's 150.
150. So the differential in our plan is 0 to 150. That's the incentive, the gag order, to get around it. Hey, it's a different, $150. That's like a night of drinking for Brady. Right? Like a Tuesday night. I don't want to go Friday night here. But a Tuesday night for Brady, 150 is good, right?
Sure.
So we're talking $150 difference. It's not $10.
Right.
It's really giving people a reason to say, is there a way for me to get a generic option here, right?
Right. And when you think about the cost of the actual plan, that's really what we're getting at. So we're looking at ways to incentivize employees and patients to help contain costs for the plan. So the ideal here is if we can have some sort of programs or language in place that are not only going to be a benefit or incentive for the employee, but more importantly, also be beneficial for the plan, why wouldn't we take those simple steps and modify the copays just to take that into place?
Sure. And another thing to consider, and we have our friend Dr. Tremblay wrote in about how he has found that Costco generally charges less to the plan, so that's the total price for generics. Where does that information come from? And again, I understand that the gag order and the PBMs, they make it a little bit more difficult to get that information, but that information is out there. I think there's this attitude that the drug manufacturer sets the price and that the pharmacy has zero control over that price. But what we've discovered in this case is that CVS was able to manipulate their UNC charge by manipulating the numbers. So if that's true, doesn't it also stand to reason that there are actual pharmacies out there that generally charge less as well? And not only is it important to steer people towards generics, but also steer them to the pharmacy itself that maybe charges less. So there's a lot of things that we could be doing. Additionally, there are a number of vendors and service providers. We work with a number of them. In fact, we've done podcasts with them where they will actually come up with programs. They're not a PBM, but rather something that layers on top of the PBM to identify opportunities to reduce costs. And again, we can't go into that right now. However, again, it's important to reach out, important to listen to the podcast to identify these other service providers that offer additional drug price reduction services.
So as you all know, I mentioned earlier, we won the award for best self-funded plan under 250 lives. So I want to keep bringing this up. How many tiers do we have on our pharmacy plan?
There's 3.
3. And what is the most you've seen?
5 generally.
5. Yeah. So how does that 5 work? Can you give us a breakdown really quick so that people understand where the potential solutions and savings are?
Sure, and Jen, feel free to jump in too, but basically it creates like a gated level of tiers that a patient must go through first before they get to more expensive drugs. So the advantage there is that you can more actively determine what the patient's going to have to pay and tie it to each individual tier. So as you have to be approved for a more expensive drug and to go to the next tier, but if you don't go through the tier benefit process, you don't get access to the drug under the plan.
Right.
So it's a great way to, structure you do it through a plan amendment into your plan, and we can of course help you in drafting that, but it's a way to help control the cost and make sure that you're not just going right to the most expensive drug first. You're trying the cheaper drugs that are effective as well first.
Well, he said that he was going to let Jen talk. She literally didn't say a word.
Jump in if
she didn't. You had her hand on her mouth, not allowing her to talk.
Yeah.
But really quick, we've noticed a lot of love for Costco on our comments. A lot of people telling us, go to Costco's website, buy your drugs there. I mean, again, So how would you know that? I didn't know that. That could simply be something you put in your newsletter, something that your HR knows.
Right.
You tell the HR director to let people know to go to Costco first, check out their pricing. I mean, simple stuff to get your patients to become consumers of healthcare like they do here at Phia.
It doesn't even have to be limited to Costco, too. I mean, you can get certain drugs now on Amazon. Have you ever looked for allergy drugs on Amazon? That's the cheapest cost that I've gotten for allergy drugs. There's other opportunities besides looking at a potential pharmacy as well.
And actually, so mentioning that, one of the stories we like to talk about is how we have a plan member, they purchased their inhaler, their asthma inhaler from Amazon rather than through the pharmacy. You know, it ends up costing $150, $150 instead of $300. And the way our plan is written, they actually get 1% of the savings.
Right.
So we're spending less on the drug, they're getting it quickly, they're getting a piece of the savings, and they're getting the same drug. So this information is out there, but you have to take active steps, A, to identify the information, and B, create incentives that will actually get people to take advantage of that information. The last thing, and a few people have mentioned, is, yeah, this is all great, but ultimately the PBM is still trying to run interception between you and these opportunities and these changes. We understand that. And ultimately, before you could really take any real action, you would have to review your PBM contract. You have to look at that scenario, look at that situation, and determine what can we do or not do without breaching our contract.
And just in the last minute we have, I want to mention pharmacogenomics. That's a great word to say 3 times fast, too. It's a new thing we've been seeing. We've been approached by some vendors who are offering this service. Essentially, it's mixing pharmacology and genomes. So it's the study of how genes affect a person's responsiveness to drugs. So there's some vendors out there who, if you give them data, they can crunch numbers and come up with, you know, a profile for an individual person on your plan and tell what drug they'll be more responsive to the first time. So you're not having to waste money and time using drugs that may not work for a particular patient based on their genetic profile. Pretty advanced stuff. It's still very new, but I think that big data in the future will be one way to help control costs.
And the good thing about that, too, is that you only have to do it one time.
Right. Well,
So,
yeah.
so if you're going to walk away from this webinar and say, what are my action items? 1, take some active steps to identify opportunities for cost containment, whether it's assessing the pharmacies, assessing the drug costs, putting incentives in your plan in order to drive people towards cost containment behavior. That's step 1. Step 2, doing whatever you can to review your current PBM and network situation to determine what can I do without breaching my contract, and if what I want to do breaches my contract, can I get my contract revised? And step 3 is identifying external entities to help you make this happen, whether it's by fixing your plan document, adopting new programs, working with third-party service providers, whatever it is, this is your chance to find partners who agree with your mentality and can contain costs.
So just want to make sure, there are so many questions. I can tell you right now, Ron and I will be doing a podcast this week, probably on Friday, because I'm traveling tomorrow to Chicago to speak at a conference. But we will do a podcast on Friday. We'll see if Jen's available and Brady to do one in relation to just all the questions and comments we're getting. On that podcast, we will share with you the list of every name of all the different websites people are telling us to go to in order to find the lowest cost drugs available. I mean, we have some, there's at least 10 different places.
Great, yeah.
So there's no question about that. All right. Any other question you want to bring up here? I think that's pretty much all the stuff we want to bring up. So really quickly, I know we're all, we like to tell Brady he has to be the future. He has to be the guy that tells us what's happening in the future. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Tonight, the Cavaliers are going to kill the Celtics. They're going to win by 20. I have a bunch of Cavs people that are from Cleveland that are dialing in. Go Cavs, Adam. I see that. Trust me, folks, it is very hard to live here in Boston with all these green teamers and have to be a LeBron and rest fan for the team. But join us on our next webinar, June 12th, 1 o'clock. We will let you know what it's about. Clearly, you guys are interested in this PBM stuff. You're interested in CVS. If we can find any other, drugstore that we can go after, so basically we'll have nowhere left to go, right? We already did CVS. I guess Walgreens is next.
Honestly, I'm going to start making my drugs at home in my bathtub.
You might have to do that.
God.
But on behalf of Jen, Brady, Ron, and myself, thank you so much for empowering your plans, and thank you so much for being a part of the Phia Group's webinar. See you next month.